I'm bringing my trendiest plant over to join me for this video, because that is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about plant trends in 2024. And this is a video that I've been really excited to make. I wanted to make one like this last year, and I think even the year before, and I just didn't get around to it. And not particularly because I consider myself to be the sort of person that is very quick to hop on plant trends, because I really don't think I am. But I just find it very interesting to kind of try and predict where plant trends are going to go next, what the it plants are going to be in this coming year. And oh my goodness, when I was going through and researching for this video, there are some amazing plants, some really amazing ones, some of which I may have added to my wish list because they are so incredibly beautiful. But yeah, that is what I'm going to be taking you through today. But first, if you're new here, hi, my name's Claire and this is Yoli. I make videos all about houseplant care, sharing tips and tricks I've learnt over the years to help keep your plants happy and healthy. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. So as I said at the beginning of this video, I don't particularly consider myself to be the sort of person that hops on plant trends just for the sake of it. I know there are some people that just like to be able to say they've kind of ticked lots of plants off and kind of built up their collection that way. And that's absolutely fine as well. If that makes you happy, then by all means do that. But for me, I just like having plants, whether or not they're common, rare, whatever they are. I just like being surrounded by plants that make me happy. And sometimes they happen to be trendy and sometimes they are just your bog standard pothos. But yeah, I've compiled a list of ones that I've started to see kind of crop up on social media quite a lot. I'm also going to talk a little bit about pricing as well, and how, like, where they're priced now and where the price is predicted to go over the next year, because that is the other thing that happens a lot of the time. For example, if we take the variegated Monstera adansonii, if you look at that this time 3 years ago, you were looking at paying like £2,000 for a cutting, and now you can get a cutting for like 20-30 quid. So I feel like it's important to kind of address that before you go in and splurge on a plant that actually, if you perhaps wait a few months, you might be able to get a lot cheaper. So yes, that is what I'm going to talk you through. And I'm going to stop talking now and I'm going to start doing it. So these are also in no particular order, but the first one on my list is the Anthurium Delta Force. And this is one that if you are on social media or you're kind of following, I was going to say following rarer plant shops, it is one that you'll probably have seen crop up recently. And I actually thought that this was a cross between the Clarinervium and the pterodactyl. And when I was researching this, it turns out I was completely wrong. It's actually a Clarinervium cross pedatoradiatum. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But that's actually an Anthurium, surprise, that I hadn't heard of before. And I did a quick Google of the pedatoradiatum, however you pronounce it. I did a quick Google of that, and that plant is retailing for around about £160 here in the UK at the moment, whereas the Delta Force, the Clarinervium hybrid one, is retailing for between 500 and 2,000 depending on the size of the plant, which is absolutely crazy. And don't get me wrong, I think it is so beautiful. Would I be willing to pay thousands for it? No, I don't think I would at this stage, and especially since I can see that the pedatoradiatum is on there for about £160. It makes me think that because the Clarinervium is such an accessible Anthurium nowadays, like you can pick up an Anthurium Clarinervium typically for about £10 here in the UK nowadays, and even places like just like your bog standard garden centres are starting to stock Clarinerviums more and more. I predict what is probably going to happen in this next year is that a lot of people probably will be investing the roughly £160 in the pedatoradiatum, in that Anthurium, and attempting to cross-pollinate them themselves at home and create that hybrid. I know that if I was wanting to make a significant amount of money and kind of invest in the Delta Force, this is probably the way that I would go about doing it. However, saying that, I obviously, as I have already made very clear in this video, don't know a huge amount about the pedatoradiatum, but when it comes to the Anthurium Clarinervium, that is a plant that I have pollinated myself before. I have grown and harvested my own berries from that plant, and I know it's one that takes a very, very, very long time from pollination to harvest. For me, I think it took about a year in total, which obviously is not a straightforward and quick process. So I think in terms of the price of the Delta Force, I think it's going to be quite a slow one to drop, just because it's not a plant that is easily like propagatable by cuttings. So if you really like this plant, then I personally still wouldn't pay that amount of money for it, but I would say look for smaller plants, look for seedlings, look for baby plants, and just accept the fact that you're probably going to be paying quite a lot of money for quite a long time. I would have thought maybe 2025 the price of this plant is going to start coming down, purely because, as I've already said, it is a long process, or I would have thought it's a very long process from germination to seed harvest. I also know myself, because I'm currently growing some of my Anthurium clarinervium babies from seed, even once the seeds are germinated, which is not a guarantee, they don't always take and germinate, but even once the seeds are germinated, growing them into decent sized plants that are kind of sellable and safe to ship is something that takes quite a long time. Like I potted my Anthurium seedlings up, I think about 6 months ago, and I've only started sending them out in the last couple of months because they just haven't been ready before that, and I haven't wanted to risk it. So yeah, that's the first one. As I say, I can see why there's such a hype around this plant, because it's got such an unusual form. The foliage is just beautiful. It's got the gorgeous veination. It ticks so many boxes. And don't get me wrong, if it was significantly cheaper, I would be rushing out and buying it. But right now, it's not one that I would be prepared to pay the money for. But then next, on the note of anthuriums, I've just put variegated anthuriums, because this is something that literally in the last kind of 6-8 months, I have seen popping up on social media everywhere, and people are going a little bit crazy for. I think primarily things like the Anthurium clarinervium. Obviously, as I've just spoken about, that is such a popular anthurium already, and it typically is one that's quite easy to take care of. I haven't had any major struggles with mine in the time that I've owned houseplants, and it's probably one of the rarer houseplants that I added to my collection early on. I think at the time I got it, I probably paid about, probably about £100 for it. And as I say, now you can get them around about the £10 mark, depending on where you go. But the variegated clarinervium is really lovely. It's really, really lovely. I know, as I say, I know people are going mad over the variegated anthuriums at the moment. And I think for me, if I was to invest in a variegated clarinervium, which are, by the way, typically retailing for around about £400, depending on the balance of variegation, if I was to invest in something like that for myself, which again, I don't think I'm going to do at the moment. In fact, I'm definitely not going to do at the moment. But I would want there to be quite a solid balance of variegation. I think if, for example, if I saw one that had half moon variegation or very kind of block strong variegation, that would tick a lot more boxes for me than kind of like more, almost like this, more kind of dappled variegation, which is what you typically see with the clarinervium at the moment. I don't have a reason for that. I just prefer the look of the block variegation more. And the other one that's also very, very popular at the moment is the variegated forgetii. And again, it is gorgeous. It is really gorgeous, but that, I don't know, they're just, if they were cheaper, then yeah, absolutely, I would pick one up and I'd really appreciate it. But it's not one that kind of makes me go, wow, like, for me personally, it's not one that's ticking the boxes. So again, I don't think it's one that I will be investing in. But at the moment, literally every single time I go onto Instagram, I am seeing pictures of all of these beautiful variegated anthuriums, the variegated Warocquianum as well, absolutely gorgeous. But I just kind of feel like a part of the reason for me why I love the dark velvet leaf anthuriums is because they're so striking and because they're so dramatic, almost with like no frills. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I kind of feel like the variegated ones are, and I might be wrong here, and I'm sure a lot of people do genuinely love them, but I feel like they're kind of adding to something that doesn't need to be added to. Like, I don't know, it's like, for example, if you were to take this one and then suddenly be like, oh, and now we can put bits of pink in it as well. I think I would just be a bit like, but why? Like, for me, I'm just like, why is it necessary? I love the Clarinervium as it is. I love my dark, glossy, velvety ones, and I think adding variegation to them, if it was, as I say, just like dappled variegation, would feel just a little bit like, I don't know, it would just kind of look like you'd splattered a bit of dirt on it. And I don't feel like that about all variegated plants, but yeah, I currently don't have the desire to spend any additional money on variegated anthuriums, but I can definitely appreciate them as being, some of them as being very pretty. But yeah, I don't doubt that they're going to blow up in the new year. I've already seen some rarer plant shops. When I say rarer plant shops, by the way, I just mean more kind of boutique plant shops that aren't just your typical garden centre. But I have seen some of those plant shops already starting to stock variegated anthuriums, so I have no doubt that they are going to be a thing in this next year. And then this next one. So the one that I'm going to talk about is the variegated version. However, I think both are potentially, the non-variegated and the variegated, are going to trend in this next year. And it's the Syngonium chiapense. And I only saw this plant for the first time actually when I was doing a Patreon live. I do these live chats with people over on my Patreon, and someone showed their Syngonium chiapense and I was like, oh my God, I was like, what is that plant? Because it does not look like Syngonium at all. And if you watch my other videos, you'll know that I'm not a massive Syngonium person. I've got rid of pretty much all of the Syngoniums from my collection now because they just weren't doing it for me. But you look at this one and it's almost like an epipremnum meets an anthurium. That's the only way I can think to describe it. And it's been on my wish list for quite a while now because I saw that one and I was like, oh my God, I need to get myself one. It's such a stunning plant. And then I was just kind of looking through some plant shops the other day when I was doing some research for this video, and I looked on the Rare Plant Shop website and I saw that they had the Syngonium chiapense variegated on there. And I was like, oh my God. To be honest, for me, I still prefer the non-variegated version. But it is a very, very special plant. It does look beautiful, and there's something about it that feels very anthurium-y, and I think they were roughly on there for around about £150, which, if you're comparing that to a variegated anthurium, it is an absolute bargain. It's still not cheap, granted, but it is a bargain. So if you're wanting to kind of go with something that has anthurium vibes, variegated anthurium vibes, and is kind of like a bit of a dupe, then I would personally say maybe go with something like that. But yeah, I'm not, as I say, I'm obsessed with the Syngonium chiapense at the moment, and I will be doing a wish list plant video for 2024 in the next couple of weeks because I have got a lot that are on my wish list. But this isn't about the plants that I love, this is about what I predict. So yeah, I predict both the non-variegated and the variegated potentially to trend in this next year. And then the next one, I've grouped a few of these together because I've just put on here variegated alocasias. And oh my goodness, variegated alocasias have taken such a, when I say such a step up, I feel like they've had a lot of media presence over this last year that has made them very desirable. And like, to be honest, my variegated Frydek here, this is one of my favourite plants, and I did first see this one on social media. I know I've said that I try not to be influenced, but I did fall in love with this plant. And then I saw it when I went to Dean's Garden Centre in York. They were having a sale that day and I was like, you know what? I've got to get it. And I don't regret it at all. I feel like, although I think I paid 175 for this one, and it was about that big with about 2 leaves when I got it, I don't regret that decision. For me, that was a very good investment because it's growing beautifully. It's giving me lots of corms as well. So if I wanted to propagate that plant and then like sell it on, then I could make my money back. That's not the reason that I'm in the plant game, but I could do that if I wanted to do that. So yeah, I think the variegated Frydek, I mean, this one, the price of this one has dropped dramatically, and I did actually make a little note here saying £45 because I saw it on, I think, the Grow Tropicals website fairly recently for about £45, which is just insane. And alocasias, obviously, compared to plants like anthuriums, alocasias are very, very quick to grow, and they do put out corms on a fairly regular basis once they're happy and once they're fairly mature. So there's a reason why the price of alocasias tends to drop a lot quicker than some of the others, such as anthuriums. So if you have got your eye on a variegated alocasia that you absolutely love, personally, I would say hold off for a little while, because as I say, I don't regret my decision in buying this one here, but if I'd known that by the end of the year I was going to be able to spend a hell of a lot less to get the same plant, I might have waited. And as I say, there's loads of beautiful types of variegated alocasia that are on the market and kind of popping onto social media at the moment. But some of the other ones that I predict that might trend in this next year are the Alocasia Silver Dragon Mint Marble, which I only saw for the first time the other day, and I think it is just beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous. And then another one that I've been seeing a lot recently is the variegated Regal Shield. And I think it's beautiful. It's probably, for me personally, not my sort of plant, just because I'm typically not a massive one for yellow variegation, like Aurea variegation. Also, before I get into talking about that one, that just reminded me there was something I meant to say in regards to the variegated Alocasia Frydek. I have seen a lot of people trying to sell this plant for more because it is an Aurea variegated, which, as I've just said, is typically more yellow variegation. And I just wanted to point out that this plant for me, obviously, is typically quite white, but its new growth does come in very yellow. And this is all from the same plant. So I just wanted to make you guys aware of that before you started paying the big bucks for a plant that is supposedly a different kind of variegation, because you do have to be a little bit careful about that. As I say, in my experience, it does just depend on the leaf, and it does tend to pale out as the leaf matures and hardens off. So yeah, just be a little bit careful about that, because people know that there is big money to be made in rare plants. It is, oh my goodness, it's very sadly become an industry that is full of scams and of people trying to make quick money. So you do just have to be so careful. Reputable buyers, knowing where your plants are coming from, being aware of things like plant poaching as well. I've spoken about all of this in other videos before, and in fact I'll link a rare plant video that I did I think about 4 or 5 months ago down below, because I go into more detail in that. But I know that's not what the video is about. It's just stuff that is very important to be aware of. But yes, I know I got very distracted there. But the Alocasia Regal Shield, as I say, the yellow variegation for me is typically not something that I go for. I don't know why, it just doesn't always tick boxes for me. But I do know that the Regal Shield is, in my experience, one of the fastest growing types of Alocasia. So if the price on this one doesn't drop quite quickly, I would be quite surprised, because if the variegated version is anything like the non-variegated version, I think it will be very quick to grow, very quick to put out corms, and therefore it will be able to meet the demands that is clearly there for the plant. So yeah, I would, if you're in any doubt, hold off that one a little bit, because I think you will be able to get it a lot cheaper. And then the final variegated Alocasia I've put on here is the Alocasia Serendipity Variegata. And this is one, again, that I only stumbled across, I think about 3 weeks ago. And the thing that I love about this one is it almost doesn't look Alocasia-like. It almost looks more like a Caladium meets Syngonium, if you know what I mean. Again, I'll put a picture on the screen so that you can see. But it kind of reminds me of, I think it's called the Caladium Squashed Frog or something like that. And I'm not a massive fan of Caladiums, but there is something about this Alocasia that I really like, and I would potentially consider getting at some point. As I say, that won't be now, because I think it's just too expensive at the moment. I couldn't actually find a price in the UK that I could include in this video, because I couldn't find anyone currently selling this plant in the UK. But yeah, I wouldn't have thought it would be that cheap. But the other thing that you can obviously think about with Alocasia is buying corms, and although it can be a little bit hit or miss, corm propagation does allow you to grow the plant relatively quickly in your own home. And as I say, once they get going, they do tend to be very quick plants to grow, and it means that you will save yourself so much money But again, on that note, obviously there's no way of proving what the plant is until it actually grows, so just make sure you are buying from a reputable source. I've heard so many stories about people that have said, oh my goodness, I've got this variegated Alocasia portadoricum and I'm potting it up now and it's going to be sprouted in 3 months' time, and then when it actually starts growing they realise that it's actually not that type of plant at all. So yeah, do your research, read reviews, talk to other people in the plant community. It's obviously never going to be a 100% surefire thing that you're not going to get scammed in some way, but typically I think if you kind of just go in there very, very cautious, then typically you can spot the signs, typically. And then the next one is, I've just put as a general variegated Scindapsus, just because I've seen so many variegated Scindapsus pop up both on social media and in real life recently. There's been a couple of more unusual plant shops that I've visited over the last year and I've seen very small variegated Scindapsus. I saw a variegated Argyraeus. I've seen a variegated Exotica and it was so, so, so beautiful. And in fact, the last couple of plant swaps that I've been to as well, there have been, I think 3 or 4 people that have brought variegated Scindapsus as well. And oh my goodness, they are stunning. So they are something that's popping up more and more at the moment. And I do predict a kind of spike next year. I have heard, however, that the variegated Scindapsus is incredibly slow to grow. I've never owned one myself, so I can't speak for that. I mean, to be honest, for me, Scindapsus, I've got a very long one that is actually just poking into shot here. But my Scindapsus plants are, on the whole, fairly quick to grow when they're grown in the right conditions. But obviously, when they do have, I mean, a lot of the forms of Scindapsus that you're looking at with variegation are much more block variegation as opposed to marbled. Like, for example, there's a lot of half moon variegation popping up. And obviously that is essentially like if you're looking at a plant that has half moon variegation, that plant is able to absorb half of the light that a normal Scindapsus would be able to absorb of the same type, if that makes sense, just because obviously the white areas don't contain any chlorophyll. They're not able to absorb light in the same way and therefore not able to photosynthesize. So I can understand why it is so slow to grow, and that is probably why there is such a hefty price tag attached to them at the moment. I mean, for a cutting of, I think it was the variegated Argyraeus that I saw, it was about £120, which obviously isn't the cheapest. But it is, to be honest, it is something that I would consider investing in at some point for the right type of Scindapsus. And I think it also depends on how you'd like to grow the plants, because for me, if I was going to have a variegated one, I probably wouldn't want to, and this is just literally personal preference, but I probably wouldn't want to grow it as a hanging plant, just because that feels, there's something about that that just feels too, what am I trying to say? Feels too blasé. I think if I had a beautiful variegated one, I'd want to get it on a moss pole. I'd want to try and get it to size up. I'd want to try and kind of bring out the best potential in the plant. So yeah, currently I don't think I have the space to be able to long-term give the plant what it needs. So I don't know. Is this me just trying to talk myself out of it for whatever reason? Maybe. But yeah, it's not one that screams out at me as something that I need to rush out and get at the moment. And then the next one I've got on this list is the Monstera Deliciosa Mint. And this is one that has kind of been up and coming for a little while, but I kind of feel like it's about to peak. I've seen lots of shops starting to stock baby plants of this. And I know it's one that people are going a little bit mad over. And you're currently, in the UK, you're currently looking at around about £500 for a baby plant. I know there's a couple of sellers that I've seen on Etsy that claim to, like one seller said they were doing seeds. A couple of places that have said they're doing them cheaper, but I would be a little bit wary at the moment because, as I say, it's a plant that is definitely not readily available. And I think it's really gorgeous. Like, I do think it's really gorgeous, and it's another one that if it was a little bit cheaper, like if you could get a baby plant for £100, I might consider it. But it's not, for me, currently worth that money. And I know that it is just because it is one that is very highly in demand, and it is one that is supposedly much slower to grow than the bog standard Monstera Deliciosa. I can see why it does have that price tag attached to it. But I think it's one of these plants that is gonna kind of like, I don't know, it's gonna be the it plants for a while, and I can just for some reason just see it kind of fading into the background, just because I personally think, obviously all of this is my personal opinion and all of my plant preferences are mine, but I just think there's much more interesting varieties of Monstera out there. Like, I'm looking at my large form dubia here, and I'm kind of surprised that more people aren't excited over something like that. Like, I think it's incredible how the form of plants like Monstera can change when they reach maturity, and I'm kind of surprised that the interest in that isn't spiking a little bit more, but it doesn't seem to be where things are going at the moment. So yeah, the mint is one that I've heard kind of mixed things about. I've got a couple of friends in the plant community that do now own the Monstera deliciosa mint. And like, with all of these plants, if it makes you happy, trending or not, then absolutely go for it. Why not? But it's one that I personally feel like will fizzle out in interest quite quickly. I also think that it's probably one where the price will drop. So again, I think if it's one that you love, then maybe just wait a little bit. Like, it is a Monstera. I know it's meant to be a slower growing Monstera, but it's still a Monstera, and Monsteras typically are not the slowest growers. So similarly to what I said at the beginning of this video about the variegated Adansonii and how that went from thousands to kind of 50 quid for a cutting, I would have thought, give it a year and a half, I would have thought that the price of this plant will maybe come down to, oh, I don't know, shall I do a prediction for this time next year and then see if I was right? Okay, so baby plants are currently going for around about £500. Oh, I would say by this time next year, I reckon £100 for a baby plant. That's based on nothing apart from the fact that I want to be right. So I will come back to this in a year's time and I'll see if all of these predictions are right, but I would be interested to know whether or not that price prediction is correct. But then next, I've just written down philodendron hybrids because I've seen some really amazing philodendron hybrids that have recently kind of hit the market. And I think as people at home start experimenting more with pollination and cross-pollination, you're getting some incredible hybrids that we just haven't seen before and very rarely occur in nature. So much more kind of like man-made hybrids. And one that I've made a note of here is the Florida Beauty Cross Tortum. This is one that I'd never seen before. And again, absolutely a social media influence. I saw this one pop up the other day and I was like, oh my God. Because I am not a massive fan of the Florida Beauty. I got rid of my Florida Beauty because it just wasn't doing it for me. And I know that the Philodendron Tortum is a very hit or miss one. I know it's one that a lot of people are like, it's kind of like a Marmite plant. I feel like you love it or hate it. It's not, it's just it can look a little bit straggly and I get why people don't like it. But oh my goodness, you put those two together and it is just stunning. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what some of the hybrids are going to be that appear in the next year. But I definitely think we're going to see a massive spike in the hybridization of different philodendrons. And I think there's going to be some really amazing ones coming out. You know what I mean. Oh, and then I put a question mark next to this one because I almost feel like maybe it's peaked. And you know what I just said about the Monstera mint? I kind of feel like how it might fizzle out quite quickly. I kind of feel the same way about this one. I put the variegated Rhaphidophora tetrasperma because I feel like at the beginning of 2023, that became a little bit of an it plant. Everyone was talking about it. Everyone was wanting cuttings of it. Cuttings were going for hundreds of pounds. I saw little plants going for thousands. It was really kind of, it was really hyped up. And I said at the time, I was like, it's, for me, I'm like, I don't really get it. I think it's nice, but I would never pay that money for it. And very quickly, the price of that one has massively dropped. And I've actually got a little, I say a little cutting. It's got about 8 or 9 leaves now from my friend Lottie that I got for my birthday. And I think it's beautiful. Like, don't get me wrong, it's a plant that I'm so grateful to own, but I would not have paid that money for it at the beginning of the year. And looking at it now, I'm like, it is becoming more and more accessible, and you can pick up cuttings for kind of 60, 70 quid, which I know is not cheap. But if you look at where it was at the beginning of this year and you look at where it is now, if you're tempted by this plant, I would say give it another 6 months, and I almost feel like it's one that you might see crop up in garden centres. I might be wrong about that, but I kind of feel like it's one, because it's so quick to grow and because it's so easily propagatable, I feel like it is one that we're just going to be seeing everywhere. So I put that on this list. I don't think it's going to be the it plant of 2024 at all. I feel like, as I say, I feel like it's kind of had its moments, and it almost, I don't know, it almost didn't quite get there. Does that make sense? Does anyone know what I mean by that? But then after that, I've got the Philodendron Whipple Way. Again, I know this one, I kind of group these two together because I'm like, has this one had its moment? But I don't think it has. I feel like the Whipple Way is one that is still very desirable. And I think because it's becoming that little bit more accessible now. I mean, you can get like a baby Whipple Way for about 50, 60 quid here in the UK. Again, not in like garden centres, you will have to go looking for it. I'm talking like Etsy, rare plant shops. But it's a gorgeous plant, and it is one that is hitting social media a lot harder now. So I feel like it is gonna have its spike in 2024. That being said, again, because it is becoming more accessible, I kind of feel like, I'm trying to think of a plant I can compare it to. I almost feel like, this isn't exactly the best comparison, but I almost feel like, you know how when variegated Monstera albo first kind of hit the markets, I mean, here in the UK I'm talking about, but I feel like it kind of did a little bit of a splurge worldwide, and it was such a social media plant. It was such a like, oh my goodness, we must have this plant. And it was ridiculously expensive. And I know it's still not the cheapest one to buy, but obviously the price has kind of declined rapidly on that one because it is so easily propagatable. And although people still love the plant, I still love the plant, there isn't quite the like, oh my God, around it in the same way that there was then, because kind of not everyone's got one, but a lot of people have that plant in their collection now. It's a rare one, but more common, if that makes sense. I've also spoken a lot in videos before about my definition of the word rare, because I don't think you can categorize a plant as a rare plant. It's not one size fits all. I feel like it's a word that will mean something different to everybody. So yeah, again, let me know in the comments down below what you define the word rare to be when it comes to plants, because I just think everybody's meaning of it is different. But I kind of feel like perhaps the Philodendron Whipple Way will be a little bit like that. I feel like it's on the lower end of what is considered, or will be on the lower end of what is considered rare here in the UK at some point in the next year. And I feel like lots of people are going to get them, and then I feel like it's still going to be a really cool plant, but maybe not quite so wow as it was. I feel like that was a very roundabout way of saying that. But yeah, that's kind of how I feel about the Whipple Way. It's kind of how I felt about the Tetrasperma as well, but I feel like the Tetrasperma is just going to fade into the background, whereas the Whipple Way is still going to be one that's very loved. Yeah, okay, that's how I feel about that. And then next, I've just put variegated philodendrons because there are some amazing variegated philodendrons, kind of in the same way as the variegated anthurium craze has just suddenly hit social media. But there are some amazing variegated philodendrons as well that I've been seeing cropping up left, right and centre, and they are beautiful. They are really, really beautiful. I've put a few on the list here. I've put the Philodendron Ploumanii variegata. I know a few people that have acquired this plant recently, and it is really, really gorgeous. I'm personally not a massive fan of the Ploumanii. Or I say I'm not a massive fan of it. It's a plant that I struggle to grow, so I would not invest in the variegated one until I've kind of figured out the standard Ploumanii. And I don't currently have a standard Ploumanii because for the time being I've given up with that plant. And then the variegated Philodendron Fuzzy Petiole. This is one that I want to love more because I love the standard fuzzy petiole. I keep saying I feel like it's a philodendron that is very underrated. I don't know why more people don't go crazy over the fuzzy petiole because I think it is such a beautiful philodendron that just, as I say, doesn't get enough credit. And the variegated one I think is lovely and it is becoming increasingly popular. But again, kind of like what I said about certain velvet leaf anthuriums and their variegation, I'm always like, is it necessary? Like, I don't feel like I need any variegation on my fuzzy petiole in order to love it. And if I had a variegated one, maybe I'd feel differently, but I have no desire to get one personally. But it is very up and coming. It is becoming very popular and I do think it's going to spike in the next year. Oh, this is an interesting one, and I had never seen this until a few months ago, but it is the Philodendron verrucosum variegata. And again, I'm not sure it would be one for me that I would rush out and buy. It doesn't make me go, oh my God, but it is beautiful. It's so gorgeous. And the one that I saw that really stopped me in my tracks was beautiful because it had a lovely balance of variegation, but it also, I don't know if it's because the variegation was almost kind of a little bit translucent, or if it's because it was just adopting some of the other colours in the leaf, but it had almost a pink tinge to it. And obviously the verrucosum has gorgeous kind of pinky red backs to the leaves. I just thought it helped to really kind of bring that through, and I thought it was lovely. But yeah, I'm not quite sure how, the verrucosum is so beautiful as it is. Again, similarly to what I've just said, I'm like, is it necessary? I don't know. I don't even know what I mean by is it necessary, but it almost doesn't make me go wow any more than the normal verrucosum. The normal verrucosum is also another one that I really struggle with. So again, it wouldn't be the plant for me anyway. The variegated gloriosum. This is one that I think is probably going to be becoming much more accessible this year, just because I think around the middle of 2023, I started seeing lots more pictures of the variegated gloriosum. And recently I have started seeing it appear from time to time in rarer plant shops, in what's, as I say, considered to be rarer plant shops. So I feel like this is one that's going to hit the markets hard in 2024. And I feel like a lot of people are going to be acquiring this plant. Out of all of the variegated philodendrons that I'm including on this list, it's probably my favourite. It's probably the one that I would go out and buy. The thing that would stop me from doing that is just the fact that it is a crawler, and I although crawling plants are beautiful, I've got enough crawlers in my collection and I just don't have space for any more because you have to grow them in trough planters. They take up so much room. They get big pretty quickly. I feel like the variegated gloriosum is probably one that would be a little bit slower, again, commonly just because it does tend to have block variegation from what I've seen, and that does mean that it's not going to be able to photosynthesize as effectively because it doesn't contain as much chlorophyll. But yeah, so it's probably the one that visually I like the most, but I don't think I'm going to be in a rush to get. And the last variegated philodendron that I put on this list, just because again, social media wise it is one that's cropping up a lot, is the Philodendron Yopii variegata. And I feel like the Yopii, almost similarly to the Tetrasperma, has kind of had its moments. And when I say this, I'm literally talking in terms of trends. I'm not talking like you might be sitting watching this video going, hey, but I've got a Yopii and I absolutely love it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't love it. Like, it is a beautiful plant. But I feel like in terms of like what social media latches onto and goes, oh my goodness, let's make this popular, I feel like it's kind of had its moment. So I think the variegated one, still very expensive to buy, very inaccessible to most of us, but I feel like that's probably the one that's going to come next, probably. So yeah, those are the variegated philodendrons that I put on this list. I have got a few more as well, actually, but I was going to say, please let me know in the comments what some of your plant predictions are going to be for 2024. Like, I would just love to know. I find this so interesting. As you can probably tell, I just love waffling about like what the next cool plants could be, because they are like, as much as you don't like to be influenced and as much as you don't want plants like pushed in your face of like, you should like this and you should like that, it is interesting to know what it's going to be. And there are some really amazing plants about. So yeah, please let me know your thoughts on all of these and let me know what you think as well. But then the next one that I have got here, and this is one that's kind of been, when I say knocking about for a while, it was on my wish list, I think about 3 years ago. It's one that I've never acquired because the price has not dropped. Well, it has, but not significantly. But it is the Monstera Bellmark's Flame. And I think this plant is lovely. I think it's really lovely. But I think there's plenty of, I know people call them dupes. I never feel trendy enough to use that word. But I think there's lots of other plants that could fit that bracket for you if you are looking to get this plant. The Alocasia brancifolia, for example, I think has very similar vibes to the Bellmark's Flame. I know it's not the same, but I think it has similar vibes. So if you're looking to kind of fill that box in your collection, then I think you could do it that way. But the Bellmark's Flame typically for a very small plant is still going for around about 600-700 quid, which is so expensive. And to be completely honest, I did think that the price of this one would drop quicker than it has. I think when I initially became aware of this plant a few years ago, and it was on my wish list just from looks alone, I think I'm right in saying that you were looking at about kind of £3,000-4,000 for this plant at that size. So obviously the price is coming down, and I don't know much about it in regards to how quickly it grows. I'm guessing it's probably quite a slow grower if the price isn't dropping quicker. So I don't feel like it's going to significantly drop, maybe by a couple of £100 or so, but I don't think it's going to significantly drop this coming year, just because I feel like we've already got quite a good indication of where it goes price-wise. But yeah, it is one that I'm seeing pop up a lot on Instagram at the moment. It is one that people seem to be really loving, maybe because the kind of £600-700 mark it still is very expensive, but maybe that is where a lot of collectors are now going, well, you know what, it's expensive, but it's worth the investment now. Maybe that's why. But yes, for me personally, it would still be too much to pay, but I do think it's one we're going to be seeing a lot more of. And then dark leaf anthuriums and hybrids I've kind of grouped that into one, because I think dark leaf anthuriums, when I say dark leaf as well, I know I've already spoken about kind of velvet leaf anthuriums like the Baroquianum, the Clarinervium. I mean, on the whole, more like the Luxurians, for example, like the Luxurians dark form that's like almost no white veination, just very, very dark, very dramatic. I know they are starting to massively trend, and I feel like there is going to be a big spike in the need for them, for the want for those plants in 2024. And then there are also some beautiful, beautiful hybrids popping up. The Anthurium Dark Mama is one that, oh my God, I have massively got my eye on. That's a Baroquianum cross papilli. Oh, I can never say this one. I just call it a pappy, but the name is actually papillilaminum. Get a name on the screen. But I feel like papillilaminum hybrids in general are also going to spike in this new year, because it does create the most beautiful hybrid plants. I've seen some stunning ones. In fact, a couple of plant swaps this year, so they are definitely kind of there and about in the community a little bit more. But yeah, the Anthurium Dark Mama is so stunning, so stunning. And from what I hear as well, it is much easier to care for than the standard Baroquianum, which for someone like me is good, because I have had the worst luck with the Baroquianum. That's one that I'd like to try again with come New Year at some point, but I've just had a really bad time with it, so I'm not sure if I will. I don't know. But yeah, dark leaf anthuriums and hybrids I definitely think are things that we are going to be seeing much more of. And then finally, this is one that I have seen crop up quite a lot in the last few months. And actually, this is one that I asked you guys on Instagram, I asked you to send me some of your predictions, and about 7 of you said this one. So I was like, oh, interesting. And I went back and I looked at it again, and I was like, you know what? I was like, you are starting to see it more and more. So I do think it is going to be one that we see much more of next year. But it is the Euphorbia Lactea White Ghost. And it is just beautiful. I am such a Euphorbia fan as it is. I've got several beautiful Euphorbias in my collection that I just adore. And this one is much more tree-like in its structure, and I just think it's beautiful. It is one that I would consider buying potentially now, just because I have bought all of my Euphorbias small and they're very quick growers once they get going, and I've had no regrets in buying any of them because I feel like they are a really good investment. This is for me. This is just for me personally. But yeah, looking at what's available here in the UK, currently they are going for around about £70, which is not, again, it's not cheap, but bearing in mind I bought my variegated Euphorbia ingens. I bought that one from House of Kojo, I think around about 2 years ago now. It was the first unboxing I did on YouTube. And I think I paid about £60 for it. It was about that big at the time. It's now almost as tall as me. So I think that was a very good investment. And the price has not significantly dropped on that plant since I bought it either. So yeah. Oh, also a very strange whirring sound has just started. I don't know what that's about. But yeah, those are currently my plant predictions for 2024. There's loads more as well that I think could have made it onto this list. And as I say, please do let me know down in the comments below what you think might be some of the next it plants. I'd be so interested to know. Also, let me know if you are the sort of person that likes having plants to tick them off your list, because as I said at the beginning, I don't think there is anything wrong with that. Like, collecting plants is about what makes you happy, and if doing it that way makes you happy, there is nothing wrong with that. But I just find it really interesting. I find it really interesting to know like how you define your plant collections. So yeah, let me know. But yes, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, have a lovely day, and I will see you in the next video.
Stay sexy, plant lovers.